you are. How lovely you look today. I blink at the woman's familiar greeting, sliding my eyes to left and right before settling them back on the twinkling orbs behind wire-rimmed glasses. Given the still early hour and the fact we're on the third floor of the museum, there's no one else wandering the halls. Thank you, and you too, I smile behind my mask, approaching the older woman who looks as though she just stepped out of an Edwardian magazine fashion plate. A large black hat bedecked with muted flowers and feathers balances atop silver hair arranged in a high, soft bun. Her natural-colored mask of cotton? Linen? I resist the urge to lean in too close. Obscures her features, but those friendly eyes speak volumes. Her antique white, pin-tucked, high-necked blouse is tucked into a dark maroon or brown walking skirt. I can't quite catch the color in this lighting. I wonder how many panels she's got in that skirt. 5 or 7, I'm guessing. 9 seems like overkill. I'm curious if she does her own sewing. Those pin tucks alone would drive me crazy. A lanyard around her neck announces her name, Mrs. Clara Kearns. Without realizing it, I begin to swat and brush at my own ensemble, tugging at the cuffs of my more modern button-front blouse and smoothing the lines of my dark gray merino wool skirt. My eyes follow the movement of my hands, and I frown down at my scuffed, mud-splattered cheap leather flats. The weather was too clear today for my boots, but enough late-season snow lingered on the ground as I made my way through the park this morning to cause some minor damage. I relax a little when I spy her ankle boots, also scuffed and in dire need of a polish. She chuckles at my observation and stretches her legs out to shake her head at her boots. My husband keeps telling me to take better care of my shoes, but I just can't be bothered with it. Did you take the train in this morning? I caught the first ride in from Leadville myself. No, I'm local. Oh, how convenient. How are things here? Is this awful flu still making the rounds or declining? She chats as she works to unravel a portion of knitting. It looks as though she's got an obvious missed stitch which didn't become obvious for a good amount of time. I can't stand when that happens. It's a pain and a half to unravel and fix. I settle into the chair beside her. I think things are fairly stable. I wouldn't have expected the flu to get as high up in the mountains as Leadville. Neither did we. But I suppose we put too much stock in being America's highest incorporated city. But you know, transportation has become so wide-reaching and accessible these days. We hadn't counted on one of our boys getting sick on a trip to visit a friend at the training camp in Washington State and bringing it back with him. I could rail about that young man's lack of sense given all the news about the flu, but there's no need. He came to regret it, I'm sure, and paid a hefty price, our first casualty. How awful. Yes, indeed, that was back in September, and since then the world has gone topsy-turvy, hasn't it? Very much so, but you're healthy, so that's something to be thankful for. And your family? Are they all well? Those bright eyes dim a fraction, and her mask puffs slightly away from her face as she sighs. My heart sinks on her behalf, but an instant later she straightens her shoulders and the fractional rise in her glasses indicate a small smile. They all are now, thank heavens, but my little grandbabies, the 2 girls, they came down with it. Oh no. Yes, and I tell you, it was a terrible thing. You know they've got a mandate in Leadville. If anyone comes down sick, they immediately post a placard on the house, and no one is allowed in or out. My daughter was all alone taking care of those sick babies. I did what I could to leave supplies for her at the door, and the neighbors as well, but it was a difficult time. I can imagine. What about your son-in-law? George? Oh, goodness, you know he's a postman. He was out working when the placard got placed. He couldn't go home. You're kidding. Not at all. He stayed with friends from work until everyone was medically cleared. And what about the rest of the city? I heard you've been the hardest hit in Colorado. Is that true? Yes, indeed it is. How have you been dealing with it? Well, I'm part of the local Red Cross. So we had already been making masks for our boys fighting in Europe once we heard about this disease. We continued on for the locals, but the big problem was a lack of hospital space and nurses. Nearly all of our trained nurses have gone off to the war effort. So what was the city's solution? City Council conducted a search for a suitable building to convert into a hospital and found it in the Clarendon Hotel. Once they got the space outfitted, they put out a call for volunteers to nurse. What a frightening thought, to volunteer to walk into such contagion. That it is, and with so many households quarantined, it looked for a while like we might not find any volunteers. But you did in the end? We did, and dear, you'll never guess the corner they came from. Where? Who? She leans in close, lowering her tone. The ladies from State Street. I gasp. Sure, my eyes are round as an owl's. The red light girls? She nods, patting the air in front of her and darting glances up and down the hall around us. Bless their souls, the bravest of us, and I don't think anyone in Leadville will soon forget that. We both pause, heads tilted toward each other and slightly bowed. Do you think the worst of it has passed? I ask. The worst of the illness, perhaps, but not the worst of this episode. What do you mean? Dear, she gives a small shake of her head, think about the end result of this disease for so many. I furrow my brow in confusion. There aren't enough graves, she explains in the manner of a grade school teacher. The mortuaries are overcrowded. But here again we've had cause to renew our faith in the good folks of our community. How so? The mining managers. They've offered full pay to any miner who will volunteer to dig graves at the cemeteries and are holding their jobs for them. That's outstanding, especially when you think what a strained relationship the miners have with upper management and how many awful clashes they've had over the years. Exactly. But I believe the tide has finally turned and we can look forward to brighter days ahead. City Council has proposed lightening the quarantine restrictions. I hope you're right, Mrs. Kearns. Oh, and I think you've got visitors coming. I look out across the hall to see a family group wandering near. Their collective jeans and t-shirts, sneakers, and a jogging stroller serve to burst the fragile bubble I'd wandered into. All at once the sounds of laughter and talking flood my ears. From across the museum and down a floor, an angry toddler screeches his or her displeasure about something, and as a little girl in a glittering tutu skirt over her dark blue leggings charges up to Mrs. Kearns with the mask-muffled question, "Why are you dressed like that?" I rise and sidestep toward the escalators, deciding it's about time for lunch in the T-Rex Cafe.